What is happening, people? It's Newcastle versus Tottenham midweek. Carabao Cup round 4 should be a cracking game at St James's Park. Little new idea for you here. I mean, this is very unique, and it's to do with combined 11 Newcastle and Spurs, and it's split into two because to cover all grounds. So start with firstly we're going to do 11 based on who's currently fit. Yeah, we're both Spurs and Newcastle players. That's how combined 11 works. Then we're going to go into players that are injured if we think they should be included too. So that way it's completely fair. We cover absolutely everything. So my guest, being of course a Newcastle fan, an opposition fan, is the wonderful Daniel Wells. Daniel, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, Harry. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. You been all right?
Yeah, I've been pretty good. Very busy at the moment. Obviously, I work up in the northeast. I support Newcastle, yes, but I cover for my job as a reporter. I cover both Newcastle and Sunderland, the other team down the road. But as much as I say that now, when it comes to reporting, of course, I'm completely neutral and biased for both teams. But today, I've got my Newcastle hat on, my Newcastle pants, socks, whatever you want to call it, and I'll be rooting for the black and whites.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you, Daniel. If you're new to the channel, please do like and subscribe. If you're listening on a podcast platform, so via audio, please drop us a follow and a 5-star review. So I'm going to start with Daniel's team, and we're going to bring it up now. Reminder: this is current team is more relevant because we're going to forget about the injuries here. So we're going to bring yours up, Daniel. Talk
Yep.
me through your thinking.
Well, obviously, as you mentioned there, Harry, this is a team that is factoring in current fitness availability and injury. So I was actually, when it came to the goalkeeper, I was at a bit of a toss-up because I thought, well, Vicario, I do quite like him, in fairness, and I think he is a good goalkeeper, and I think certainly with his feet, probably a little bit better, well, actually I say a little bit better, probably a lot better than Nick Pope. I don't think there are many keepers who could be worse than Nick Pope with his feet. There's always a collective groan in St James's Park whenever Nick Pope gets the ball at his feet, because we know it's either going to be a very scary moment for everyone involved, or the ball is going to end up out for a throw-in. It tends not to go very well, but Nick Pope this season I think has been really, really good in terms of shot stopping, and actually his distribution with his hands and throwing is really quite good. I mean, I'm sure we all saw the assist he got in the Champions League against Benfica, that 65-yard throw, and I think, well, if he can do that with his arms, it's just fantastic. But of course, he can't do that with his feet. But Vicario, I think, great with his feet, perhaps, but perhaps just not quite as good of a shot stopper as Nick Pope. And I thought, if I'm factoring in Nick Pope's throwing distribution plus his shot stopping, I think that just edged him just a tiny bit clear of Vicario. And I think also he has a little bit more experience of this level in the Premier League. And of course, yes, this game's a Carabao Cup game, but I just thought in terms of English football in general. Then we get into the defence. Now, I'll look at both of the full-backs first, because at the moment, Newcastle have a bit of an injury crisis at full-back. We do have our second choices, perhaps, playing. Kieran Trippier, former Spurs player, of course, playing at right-back. Then you've got Dan Burn at left-back. Now, Dan Burn did play at left-back for Newcastle when he first joined the club, and actually played there for the whole season when they finished 4th in 2022-23. But since then, he's got older. His pace he didn't have a lot of pace to start with, but what pace he did have has dwindled a bit. And teams do tend to target him a little bit when it comes to going down the wing, because of course he just hasn't got that turn of pace. And that's something that I think, well, Jed Spence does have that. And of course, Jed Spence has had a great season. You can't deny what he's achieved so far this campaign. First Muslim player to represent England is no mean feat whatsoever. So I thought he's probably a shoo-in just because, just because of the pace he has, but also how much he contributes to the attack. And that's something that Dan Burn doesn't really do because of his lack of pace. When Newcastle, say, have Lewis Hall in there at left back or Tino Livramento, you get so much more because they can defend, but also they can add to what Newcastle do going forward. And Burn is a great defender, don't get me wrong, and when he's playing at left centre half, fantastic. But at left back, he is caught short and caught wanting every now and then. So I thought Spence, given what he's done so far this season, was the best pick to go in at left back. And right back, now as much as I do love Kieran Trippier, because He's been fantastic since he's come to Newcastle. There's only been the odd moment where little mistakes have let him down and let the team down, but for the most part, he's been a great professional. Chipped in with some fantastic goals, and his leadership qualities are outstanding. But a bit like Burn, he's just on the older side now, and Pedro Porro is just that bit younger, that bit more dynamic. He's got a great delivery into the box. Perhaps Trippier, you could argue, is a better defender, I would say. I think Porro sometimes gets a little bit caught short when he's, has a winger going towards him, but I think just for what he offers going forward, and especially that delivery into the box, I think I've watched Porro a few times, and I think his delivery is fantastic. And so for that reason, I've put him in at right back. Then your centre halves, I've gone with Newcastle's pairing of Malik Chow and Sven Botman because, well, this season they've been just a brick wall together since they've come into the side. Now, Newcastle didn't start the season with those two as their defensive partnership. It was Fabian Schär and Dan Burn, but since Botman and Chow have come into the side, they've been irreplaceable, to be honest. Both of them very young, of course. Dan Burn and Fabian Schär in their early 30s, whereas these two, essentially, give or take a few years, are 10 years younger. So you're getting the youth, more dynamism. Chow in particular is able to break through the lines, and that's not to say Botman doesn't, but Chow does it perhaps a bit more often. And just so far, they've just looked so composed and assured. And I think just because of the partnership they developed, I didn't want to split them apart, so I thought I'd put both of those in. Now into the midfield. Now I'll start with the Tottenham player I've put into the midfield, and that's João Palhinha. Now, of course, he was good at Fulham. He went off to Germany, did well there, and I think since he's come back to England, I've watched him a few times, and I just love his ball-winning ability. That really strikes me as impressive, and I think that's something that Spurs can use really well to their effect, especially sort of like in a sweeper role type thing, but also winning the ball and then driving it forward as well. Now, Joe Linton is, in essence, similar in that regard to Palhinha, but I think just because of the technical ability Palhinha also has, which Joe Linton doesn't have as much of, that's why I've put him in there. And then the other two midfielders I've got are Bruno Guimaraes and Sandro Tonali because, well, Bruno Guimaraes is having a great season. There's no two ways about it. Scored at the weekend against Fulham, a late winner. Has actually scored a few more goals this season, perhaps, than he was getting towards the latter part of last season. He's getting into more advanced areas, and I think he's been coached into that over the summer to try and score a few more goals for Newcastle, because that was perhaps the only part of his game that was lacking. He would get the odd one, but he's got a good few already this season, and in certain games as well, he's essentially dragged Newcastle to points. And then you've got Sandro Tonali, who I think is Newcastle's best player, better than Bruno Guimaraes. And I know some people might think, wow, but Sandro Tonali is Newcastle's most important and best player, in my opinion. He's similar in the sense that he can act as a sweeper and a number 6 to Palhinha, and you could also put him into that middle role as well. In fact, he plays for Newcastle in the middle of the three in that 6. And it's just his engine, his pace, which is perhaps goes under the radar a little bit as well. His strength on the ball, his technical ability is fantastic, but also just his will to be everywhere and cover every inch and blade of grass throughout the 90 minutes. He's just a magnificent footballer to behold. And as I say, on the ball as well, his technical ability is second to none. So for me, he's Newcastle's most important and their best player, and has to be in there without a shadow of a doubt. Now, moving into the front three. Now, right wing, I did deliberate between Jacob Murphy and Mohamed Kudus. Jacob Murphy has had a great sort of 18 months for Newcastle of the past season and a half or so. His goals, his assists have been fantastic. There's been a bit of a funny phrase up here in the northeast, of course, when Alexander Isak left in the summer. A thing went around on social media saying Liverpool have bought a top of the range iPhone, but they haven't brought the charger. And that, of course, was Jacob Murphy, because of the amount of assists and goals that he provided to Alexander Isak on a plate last season. I think around sort of a third or half of the goals Isak scored were provided to him by Jacob Murphy, and that just shows how important he was actually in Isak getting all the goals that he did last season. And of course, Isak hasn't hit the ground running, as we know, at Liverpool. He may well do, and he probably will do at some point, but at the moment he is struggling to find his feet, whereas Jacob Murphy still looks just as decent. But Murphy is in his early 30s, and I think Kudus has come into Tottenham's side and done really well so far. He's got that trickery that I like with a winger as well. And he looks like he's got something about him. Obviously, great goal against Leeds United at Elland Road recently, and I think that he'll develop under Thomas Frank and develop at Tottenham perhaps more than he was doing at West Ham. So I thought I'll give him the chance at right wing. Going to left wing, I've got Anthony Gordon because at the moment, well, you could argue at times he's been inconsistent, and that's true, he has, but when he's on song, he is unplayable. For example, against Benfica in the Champions League, he was absolutely fantastic, scored, but also ran his fullback absolutely ragged, so much so that the fullback had to go off with a groin injury. Gordon had beaten him that many times on the night with his pace. Now, you could argue Gordon perhaps needs to do a bit more in terms of providing, but he started to already this season. He has got a few goals in the Champions League, and perhaps not so much in the Premier League so far. He needs to do that a bit more, but he is starting to get there. And of course, he is England's starting left winger over Marcus Rashford at the minute as well. And that's quite an achievement in itself. So I thought on that basis, he has to go in there. Thomas Tuchel seems to prefer him. And at the minute, he's doing relatively well for Newcastle as well. And then up front, I've got Nick Voltemade, who I've never quite seen a player like him. Honestly, when Newcastle sold Alexander Isak, obviously there was a lot of doom and gloom on Tyneside, but then we didn't realise what we'd bought in Nick Voltemade for about, 2/3 of the price. He is unbelievable to watch. I've never seen such a tall and lanky player have such a fantastic touch and such a silky way of playing the game. It's as I say, very unique. There's no one really that I've ever come across like him before. And of course, in terms of goal scoring, he's hit the ground running at Newcastle. He's got 5 already. And it's also the manner of goals he scored. Yes, he's got 1 penalty, but that penalty in itself was literally the most postage stamp of penalties you could ever have had, right, literally into the roof of the net against Nottingham Forest. And then the other 2 goals have been 2 headers, showing that he's got that instinct to get into the box at the right time. And then the other 2 have been backheel flicks. So it just shows that he's got that knack for the creative type of goal as well. So I have to give it to him. He's hit the ground running at Newcastle. Not just because of his goal scoring, because of his all-round play as well. I mean, he set up or helped to set up the goal, Newcastle's 3rd goal against Benfica, and his little flicks and awareness on the field as well is phenomenal to watch. It's, as I say, so unique and so silky. Looks a bit like Rudi Voller as well, but perhaps even better than that former German striker from the 1980s. But I think that rounds off my team. And as I say, Nick Voltemade, I thought, because Tottenham, obviously, you've got Solanke, but he is a bit hit and miss with injuries. Richarlison can be hit and miss. So I thought just because of the form he's shown so far, Nick Voltemade had to go in there. And that is my team with injuries and fitness availability all factored in so far.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Really do appreciate that. So that's Daniel's team, with players that are fit. So just run it through for people who are listening on audio to recap. He's got with Nick Pope in goal. Backline of Porro, Chow, Botman and Spence. A midfield of Guimaraes, Paulinho and Tonali. And a forward line of Kudus, Voltemade and Gordon. Daniel, I think this is a good team. I'm going to press you on one thing, if you don't mind, because Newcastle, you're right, have been very good defensively, but I want to know how close Mickey van der Ven was to getting in that team. I agree with putting Chow in there. I think he's been great. Botman, I'd say, could van der Ven potentially go in instead of Botman? How close are you in that decision?
I wouldn't say hugely close, and that's probably because I watch more of Botman than I do of Van der Ven. But to be fair to Van der Ven, he did very well against Everton on Sunday, getting goals. And I think they are quite similar players. Van der Ven probably has a bit more pace than Botman, but I think perhaps Botman's reading of the game is a little bit better. Now, they've both struggled badly with injuries since they've come to their respective clubs in England. Although you could argue that Botman's injury was perhaps... well, it was an ACL and then little niggly ones after that as well. So it wasn't one that's sort of like a repetitive one. It's one that's a really unfortunate incident. But before that, he was absolutely fine. And since he's finally now got back to full fitness, again, seems okay. Whereas Van der Ven's, from what I know at least, are they more muscular injuries, Harry? Have they been more sort of muscle? And that's my concern with Van der Ven. Because, yes, Botman's had a long time out as well, and so has Van der Ven. But I feel like Botman's injury, once it's healed, and because it's an ACL, yes, it can affect you very badly for a long time, but he's now getting back to his best, and unless he, suddenly does pull a hamstring or something like that, his injury record before the ACL and since it as well has been okay, whereas Van de Ven having those little muscle ones that keep him out every now and then for little, maybe 2 to 3 weeks at a time, it can disrupt the player's rhythm, can't it? And it takes time. And so that's the only reason I think I went ahead with Botman. And I think also, as I said before, the sort of the partnership he has with Chow too. But yeah, quite close, not overly close, and I think that's literally just because I think Botman, he's been described as a Rolls Royce of a centre half, but that's not to say Van de Ven isn't as well. But I think just because when Botman's been at Newcastle and fully fit, he's been really good, and apart from that chunk where he's been out with an ACL, he's been all right. Whereas Van de Ven, you just worry how often are these little niggly injuries going to be occurring, and that's my only concern with him.
Fair enough. That's a good point there. Okay, appreciate that. Thank you very much, Daniel. With Van der Ven, it's to do with the hamstring constantly and then little nicks here and there, niggles and protection last season. But he's been okay so far. Don't want to jinx it this season. But my team then, let's bring it up on screen. So I'm going to read it out, then run you through. So Cario in goal, backline of Porro, Chow, Van der Ven and Spence. A midfield of Paulinho, Guimarães, Tonali, and an attack of Kudus, Voltemada, and Gordon. So I'm going to talk you through it one by one because it's nearly a 50-50 split, though it literally can't be. It's not possible, having 11 players. So goalkeeper, firstly, Vicario. I share the thoughts of Daniel with this. I think it's extremely close. I think I've leaned towards Vicario slightly because his distribution, as you said, isn't fantastic. It really isn't. It's a little bit better than Pope. I'd argue Vicario is a little bit more of what I'd call a modern goalkeeper. But I went backwards and forwards on this one. Originally, I did go with Pope. I think it's really difficult. One, because Pope, he's down low in the corner. I'd actually back him to save it. If Pope saves more, you don't expect him to. But I've gone with Vicario mainly due to form. I think it's an excellent week with 2 clean sheets and really proved why he should be Tottenham's number one. But I think really for me anyway, it's a 50-50. Back line then, it's easier because Newcastle have Lewis Hall and Tino Livramento out. If they're both fit, which we'll find out a little bit later, this becomes really, really difficult, if I'm honest with you, even as a Spurs fan. So Porro at right back over Trippier. I think, of course, as you said, Trippier's not getting any younger. If we was just on like 1v1 defending, or in particular just defending in, let's say, a low block, it's Trippier every day of the week. But Porro going forward, I think, offers a lot more and offers a lot more support, for example, to whoever's playing right wing. Spencer have at left back and play either side. I think he's been very, very good. And like you said, more versatile in a way than Dan Burns. Certainly, he's got more about him in an attacking sense. I like Burn, and he can, to talk about versatility, he can also play in a couple of positions, so can Jed Spence. So I wouldn't say, my goodness, it's a simple decision, but I think Spence is locked in that team. Centre backs then, it feels incredibly harsh from my point of view not to put Romero in, but he's currently been out injured. So I literally, again, we can't put him in. That's why, if people wondering. So I've gone with Van der Ven and Chow. I think Van der Ven's been amazing, if I'm honest with you. I think stepped up another level this year. I think Frank looked at him and went, "You're great, but how can you be even better? You don't score many headed goals, and you're, really tall, 6'4", and he's got a lot more headed goals this year. I think he's up to 5 goals now in, 12 appearances in all competitions. It's a lot more than he got the whole of last season. So, really impressive from Van der Ven. And Chow, I think, settled in really well. Great signing, great bit of business from AC Milan. So I think he does have to go in there. I like Kevin Danso, but Chow's done it for more games this season. Midfield then, this is where it's really interesting. I think the strong point of both teams, if I'm honest. I think there's all 3 of these players. It sounds crazy to say, as good as the midfield depth is for both teams, all 3 had to get in. It's literally as simple as that. Paulinho has been an excellent signing, so it felt wrong to look past him, the amount of tackles he makes. Bruno Guimarães, Newcastle captain, I think he's literally, talk about the engine room. I think, Guimarães can do anything from a defensive point of view, an attacking point of view, and you just got to watch him on the edge of the box. He's a real, I think he leads by example. So I really look to Guimarães and go, you are a top player. I think we start to have that conversation. People talk about the likes of Bruno Fernandes and other top creative players. I think it's time we add Guimarães to that conversation. And Tonali, I think, has to be in there. Tonali's a player where it's really hard to deal with because he kind of has a little bit of everything. With Guimarães and Paulinho, both good players, but you know how to, in a way, to stop them. But Tonali's hard to kind of deal with. He's a difficult player. It's hard to really explain, but he's just a little bit different to what anyone else has. And I just think covers the ground. So I think he has to be in there. Forward line, if I'm honest with you, I didn't have to think too much about this. Going with the striker first in Nick Voltemada. I think Spurs have a lot of strikers with loads, but it's again who's fit is the question, but also who's up and firing. It's too early to put Moani in. So Voltemada, quite a simple decision, as is Mohamed Kudus on the right. But I forget Daniel makes a very good point about Jacob Murphy. He's been fantastic. Was last season. Haven't seen him as much this season because I haven't watched Newcastle as much. What I have seen, he's looked good. But for me, Kudus has been one of the Premier League kind of signings of the summer. Not the number one necessarily, but in the top few. So for me, I feel it's difficult to look past Kudus. Either way, he's got to be in the team, but I'm not sure about position. Then I think it's again a simple decision to put Gordon on the left. The only player that really for me was in contention would have been another Newcastle player. Could you put Harvey Barnes in there? Is what I was thinking, more than putting another Tottenham player in there because he didn't replace Son, and haven't really found someone that's at home in that left wing position. People made their case. To me, Odebear's the closest to making that his. Can Xavi Simons play there until he feels more comfortable up to life with the Premier League and a new system, a new manager? Can he play left wing and almost earn his trust to play in the 10, some would say? Can Richarlison make that position here? He's got lots of strikers. I'm not totally convinced he'll stay fit, so I don't know if that could be him. Can Colin Wani play out there? There's lots of questions that Spurs fans want to know. Can Tell play there? So I think we've got players that can play there, but in terms of the quality, not what Newcastle have got. So I've gone with Anthony Gordon. So to recap, Vicario, Porro, Chow, Van der Ven, Spence, backline, including the goalkeeper, Paulinho, Guimaraes, and Tonali in midfield, then Kudus, Voltemada, and Gordon up top. Daniel, do you have anything to say about that? Anything you strongly disagree with?
Nearly. So yeah, looking at the midfield and forward line, Harry. Well, not a lot because what we've picked is exactly the same. As you say there, I think all of those 6 players from the midfield to the forwards, they were sort of shoo-ins, weren't they? I don't think you could have sort of picked anyone else. Obviously, when it comes to goalkeeper, yes, I think, as I say, it could have sort of gone either way, to be honest. And just from perhaps where your bias is a little bit, or who you prefer in certain circumstances. And then the only other one, as we've already discussed, is the Van der Ven Botman one. So apart from perhaps Van der Ven and Vicario, no, there's that would be it. And obviously that you've picked those, I've picked Botman and Pope, but apart from that, doesn't really change an awful lot, does it?
No, it doesn't. No, it's a very good point. Thank you, Daniel. So there we go then. And we'll move on now to the next part where injuries are almost forgotten about, which will be quite fun, I think, for both teams at the moment. I think we can both relate to that. Daniel, I'll give you yours first. Talk me through it.
Well, yeah, it's perhaps more Newcastle heavy, isn't it, compared to the last side that I did. In fact, I've only got 2 Tottenham players in there, and obviously Paulinho stays in there, Kuda stays in there, but after that, the fullbacks both become Newcastle players, and I think I'll start with Livramento, and I think that's self-explanatory. He is England's most versatile fullback at present, being able to play both right back and left back. And funnily enough, he's actually been, perhaps at Newcastle, even better at left back than he's been at right back at times as well, which no one really expected. In fact, when he first signed, people said, oh no, you can't play him at left back. And yet, all of a sudden, he's been actually just as good. And say, when Lewis Hall's been out injured, which he was at the end of last season, you had Kieran Trippier at right back, and you had Tino Livramento at left back, and the two of them together were fantastic. And Livramento, especially on the left wing, was really good. In fact, if you went back to the Carabao Cup final last season at Wembley, it was Livramento's ball from left back with his left foot that was put in to the back post, which Jacob Murphy headed down for a certain Swedish striker who I've forgotten his name, to put into the back of the net. And of course, that's what won Newcastle the cup on that occasion. And then you've got Lewis Hall on the left-hand side. Now, Lewis Hall is a little bit younger than Tino Livramento, only by a couple of years, though. But I've interviewed Lewis Hall, and he's such a lovely young lad, but also he is fantastic. And I think if it wasn't for injuries at the moment, he'd be very much in the conversation for England's starting left back. Now, of course, you could argue that if he goes with Reece James at right back for Thomas Tuchel, you could then put Livramento at left back, and I'd be fine with that completely. But I think what really sort of gets me a little bit is that Arsenal supporters, and I think you probably agree with me here, Harry. Well, at least I imagine you might do with Miles Lewis-Skelly. Now, I'm not saying Miles Lewis-Skelly is a terrible player, because clearly he's not. To play for Arsenal, you've got to be at least half decent. but I don't think he's quite as good as what they're making him out to be. At least not yet. He may develop more and he may become really fantastic. But at the moment, despite his young age, I rate Lewis Hall more highly. And I think that if it hadn't been for injuries, Lewis Hall would have been in ahead of Miles Lewis-Skelly playing for England at left back a lot more often than he was. Now, Lewis Hall, of course, got injured towards the end of last season. That really hampered him a little bit. And then he's had a couple of sort of niggly ones since then just because of sort of a knock-on effect of what's happened. But he is meant to be back either this weekend coming or the weekend after a bit of a hamstring strain. And I think everyone in Newcastle is really looking forward to that. Now, of course, he is young, so that he'll be eased back in. You don't want to sort of make his life any worse in terms of injuries because of his age. But he started Newcastle's last season as the starting left back, and just every week, not just going forward and contributing to the attack, but actually defensively, he got better every week. 1-on-1, he was really, really good. And also his technical ability is actually probably better than Tino Livramento's in terms of passing and picking out players and finding balls going forward as well. So Lewis Hall for me had to be in there. Just a shame he's been injured a bit of late. But to be honest, when you look at that team and you think you've got Livramento on the right and Lewis Hall on the left, that could well be England's starting fullback partnership in a few months' time in America if both of them stay fit and keep playing the way they have been and they know they are capable of as well. That's not to say, of course, Reece James won't start at right back, because he would probably if he's fit too, but that means Livramento will probably go to left back because he's just as good at left back as he is right back. So yeah, I thought those two had to come into the side. As I say, as to the rest, it remains the same, but Livramento and Hall, I think, two of the most highly rated young fullbacks in this country, and I think they both deserved to be in the side.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for that. Appreciate that. So to recap on Daniel's 11, he's gone with Pope in goal. He's got the back line of Livramento, Chow, Botman, and Hall. In midfield, Bruno Guimaraes, Yao Polina, and Sandro Tonali. And an attack of Kudus, Voltamada, and Gordon. Not a bad team at all. Thank you very much. But a little bit different, I think it's fair to say, to mine. That you can tell what club we support. Put it that way. So here's my team, and I'll talk you through it. So again, Vicario in goal. Backline of mainly Spurs, but I've got Livramento of Newcastle in there. I've got two Spurs centre backs in Romero and Van der Ven, and Jed Spence at left back. I've gone with a midfield of, I think, as I said before, Guimaraes and Tonali are just definites for me. And I've gone with Kulusevski of Tottenham, because I think Spurs fans in particular forget how valuable he was last season in that first half, because he got injured roughly in the halfway point. He's by far, for me, our best player in the first half of that season. Then the attack, Kudus on the right, I go Voltamada up top and Gordon on the left. So the attack is pretty much exactly the same. So again, it's not completely one-sided, but I think he just about does tip Spurs in this. Well, I think I worked it out. It's 6 Spurs players in both of my sides and 5 Newcastle. So I was surprised it was a little bit more Spurs, but different personnel in this one. So I took you through some of it. Livramento, I've said before, I think is a fantastic fullback. I think Daniel's absolutely right, but I would compare him to Jed Spence in terms of someone that is very versatile, and especially for club and country, for England, in the case of both of them, and Newcastle for Livramento, Tottenham for Spence. For me, the centre-back partnership of Van der Ven Romero is very strong. I think it's getting closer and closer every game to the likes of Gabriel and Saliba at Arsenal, which we, of course, hear about a lot. I think Van der Ven, now he can score goals a lot more with his head. I think gap has narrowed. A lot of Spurs fans ago, they're absolutely far clear. I don't think it's as simple as that. I think the gap is closing. It's not the comparison we want or need. We should be comparing points and clean sheets, stuff like that, rather than individuals. So the back line, I think for me, I'm pretty confident with that back line, apart from the goalkeeper, where I honestly, it depends on what game it's after. If it's after a really good Nick Pope performance, you probably put him in there. It's after a good Vicario. It's this week, put it this way, which is being recorded this week. This comes after Vicario's had a fantastic week, single-handedly saved us against Monaco. We would have lost that game 2-3-0. That's no exaggeration. He was huge in that win against Everton. Beto, a head kick save, and Dye, Grealish, he kept out several players. Midfield then, there's a lot of contenders, even if you look at Tottenham, for example, Maddison when he's fit, and even Joelinton's a fantastic player, obviously now been converted into midfield, which feels like a lifetime. But, what choice that was, I think, by Eddie Howe to recognise that you're not really a striker, you're an engine room in this midfield. You're the legs, you're the physicality, and this midfield battle ahead of the weekend's game is critical. But I've gone with Kulusevski, Guimaraes and Tonali. And the attack end's the same, so I'm not going to explain that too much. Kudus on the right, Voltemada up top, and Gordon on the left. I think even with everyone fit, I don't think a lot changes. I think I like Solanke, but he hasn't proven himself at all. So that's my team. Not much to it apart from that. But Daniel, anything you got to say about my team?
Well, I actually do like the introduction of Kulusevski into that as well. I've always liked Dejan Kulusevski. I think he's a really good footballer as well. I just think I like Palhinha's ball winning ability. To be honest, that's the reason I put him in. And I think Kulusevski at times has gone slightly missing in games a little bit, but I do rate him highly, and I'd be happy if he was at Newcastle. Certainly, I think he's a really, really good footballer. Um, as you say, I'm glad you've got Livramento in there as well. I think he's just so versatile, so good going forward. And one-on-one, I don't think there's many better fullbacks in terms of one-on-one defending. No one tends to get past him very easily at all in terms of wingers going forward. Obviously, you've kept Van der Ven, fair enough. I would obviously have Botman and Spence. I can understand that over Lewis Hall at the moment. Spence has been really good in himself and obviously is deserving and perhaps of a place. I'd personally go Hall, but I can understand Spence completely. And Romero's an interesting one. Is it fair to say his disciplinary record isn't the best at times?
Yes, but it's getting better, I think.
Okay, that would perhaps be my only qualm with him a little bit. For a defender, you sort of don't want them always rushing into to meaty challenges, and obviously I know you do. You want them to put in those full blooded tackles, but you don't want them also getting bookings and getting being sent off all that often. And so fair play if he is improving it. Fair play, I'll concede that point. But I think I thought, well, yeah, I've certainly seen him being sent off perhaps a few too many times or had a few too many bookings where perhaps he didn't need to get booked. So that's why I went with Chow just in that regard. The rest of the team, obviously, as I say, remains very similar indeed, but they would be my only little points of contention on that one.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And with Van der Ven, you raise Romero, you raise a very, very good point. But I think he's given the captain's armband role this year. I think since he's given that, I know he's been out injured the last couple of games, for us. However, I think that's where we've seen him just mature almost without being too patronising or disrespectful. He's not flying into tackles at all. And I thought, the thing is with Romero, usually we're losing and he'd go flying in. And do you know what? He has this unreal ability where he wins the ball. Like, he'd go in with 2 feet, and 9 times out of 10 he wins the ball. Like, it'd be 2 feet high, but at the same time he's got control of the situation. So I think he's always had that good tackling element, but being Argentinian, he's had that, like, I want to wipe you out when things are going bad. And we've got Chelsea after you at home, and that's a fixture Romero. Remember, he got sent off and has been involved in lots of yellow cards and red card battles with them already since joining Spurs. So yeah, he needs to be very sensible. But that's both of our teams then, which is interesting because we covered absolutely everything. Daniel, thanks so much for coming on. Where can people find you on the socials?
Well, thanks for having me first, Harry. And if you're watching on screen, you can see I can point to it there, my Twitter and Instagram handle at DanielWhale023. If you're watching on TV, on television, I suppose most of your viewers will be in London, Harry. So if you were watching our channel in London, which is London TV, Channel 7 on Freeview or 159 on Virgin, you'll actually most of the time see my colleague Charles, because he is our resident London sports reporter. So if you're wanting to watch him on TV, you're probably not going to be able to because I'm not in London and I don't do the London broadcasts. But you can do it online if you're perhaps, from London but have some sort of a weird obsession with the North East and Newcastle United or Sunderland or Middlesbrough. You can go to Tyne and Weir TV on YouTube, and that's where all our TV broadcasts from the North East also get uploaded onto social media as well. But for the most part, if you want to give me a follow on Instagram or Twitter, that is my handle there. I can model it for you with my hand. But please do, if you want to give me a follow, please do. As I say, plenty of content from the Northeast, Newcastle and Sunderland in particular. I'll be in the press box tomorrow night at St James's Park. I'll be speaking to Eddie Howe afterwards. Also Thomas Frank. I tend not to ask the opposition manager a question because they let the Tottenham reporters do that, but I'll still be filming it and be listening into what he has to say as well in the press conference room at St James's Park. So certainly be an interesting one. As for the game itself, well, I don't know if you're going to ask this already, Harry, in terms of what we think of the game. Well, I'll get into it anyway. Tough one to call, I think. because I think both sides will make changes in this game. I think both teams have got a good enough squad now that they can afford to make changes without losing too much quality. So I think for Newcastle, you might see the likes of Jacob Ramsey come into the midfield. You might see William Asula start up front, Harvey Barnes, Anthony Elanga perhaps starting on the wings. I think the defence will stay largely the same for Newcastle, but I think you might see Aaron Ramsdale come in between the sticks in goal to give him a bit of a run out. I think I'd back Newcastle just because they're at home and they have a very good home record against Tottenham over the last few years in the Premier League. Obviously, this is a Carabao Cup game. As I say, the teams will be perhaps altered. So I'd be tempted to go with Newcastle, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's a tight game. And I think at the same time, I think Newcastle clearly want to defend their Carabao Cup crown, which, by the way, sounds lovely saying it from my point of view. But I think Spurs will be up for it too. But at the same time, do both teams have bigger fish to fry this season? That's perhaps another point of contention as well. So I'm not entirely sure, but I think I'd back Newcastle, but in a tight, maybe a 1-0, 2-1 sort of a game.
Thank you very much, Daniel. You stole my next question. Love it. You're doing a job for me about score prediction and also your lineup. You've done both. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Please follow Daniel. As he said there, you've got his X handle at Daniel Wells 023. You know I am. I'm Harry Scarfe. You can drop me a follow across any social at Harry Scarfe22 for daily football content. Yeah, it's top content, income content, you name it. Yeah, if you listen on YouTube, like, subscribe. For listening via audio, that's a podcast platform. Don't forget to drop a follow and a 5-star review and enjoy the game. Thank you very much.